Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next installment of the JKLMedia podcast. And today we're talking about my pick, and I want to thank my two co-hosts for agreeing to doing this because I know it's a long movie, but it's extra special for me because unbeknownst to my two co-hosts, this is a gift for me because today is my birthday. And
Happy birthday!
so
Yay!
Why did we
anytime,
not know that?
I don't know. I don't usually promote it, but
Oh,
I
okay.
wanted to thank you because this is anytime we get to talk Stephen King is always a gift to me, much like for Jesse talking Bruce Springsteen or God knows why Doctor Who. But we're here to talk about The Green Mile, which is the second of two or three Frank Darabont adaptations of Stephen King's story. The other two being The Shawshank Redemption, which is my all-time favorite movie, and The Mist. But The Green Mile, undeniably, I think impacts people emotionally much stronger than either of the two other movies. And it's just a marvelous, again, adaptation of a story by Stephen King that uh, I think is universally liked. I don't think there's too many detractors. Interestingly enough, I want to talk a little bit about the background of the story, but before I do that, I don't want to leave my co-hosts sitting on ice too long. So what I'll ask is for both of you to, as shortly as possible, give your overall summary of a 3-hour movie. And if you've seen it before, if you can remember if there was any differences between the first time you've seen it and now knowing the story, watching it the second time. Karen, I'll start with you. What are your overall thoughts of The Green Mile and how was
Just
watching it
quickly,
this time?
here's my thing. It
Okay.
wrecks me. Every time I see it, it
Yeah.
wrecks me. And it doesn't feel like a 3-hour movie to me. So
Wow. That is concise. Jesse?
Yeah, I I'm going to be a little bit longer than Karen, but I promise not too long. I remember the joy of picking up the small paperback versions of this, right? There was it
Yeah.
was serialized.
Yeah. Have
Back
to do
this
them
was
one at a
before
time.
Kindles,
Yep.
before that where
Good.
you pick
Oh,
this up. And I remember the the excitement
there
of
we go.
Stephen King talking about that he wanted to do this to stretch his creative muscles because you can't go back and change something, right? You can't
hmm
edit because it's already been published, and was so excited that we were going to get a movie version of this, and was incredibly satisfied with what ended up on the screen. The it In watching the movie yesterday made me want to pull out the book and reread the book. And I will probably do that as I finish my current book I'm reading. I will probably go and reread The Green Mile.
Cool. Yes. So the Green Mile
Samesies. Let me
is
I'm sorry,
okay. Go
samesies for
ahead.
me.
Yeah.
I felt like I should go back and read.
Yeah. It's remarkably the movie covers about 90% of the story. And I think in some ways maybe it's a better version because it cuts out some pretty dark stuff that King always seems to want to throw in, especially with the death of his wife and whatnot. So that's interesting for sure. The serialization aspect of this story is for people just coming across the story for now and may not be familiar with the background of it. But King wanted to basically recreate the same sort of that was going on with the days of Charles Dickens when they would send over installments of his stories over the ocean by ship, and people would be waiting on the docks, literally waiting on the docks to get the next installment of the latest Charles Dickens story. So King wanted to recreate that experiment with this serialization of this story, and it came out in six books: The Two Dead Girls, The Mouse on the Mile, Coffey's Hands, The Bad Death of Edouard Delacroix, Night Journey, and Coffee on the Mile. As Jesse mentioned, the thing was King, once the first book, each installment came out, he couldn't go back with another pass and tighten it up or anything or make corrections. It was a balancing act for him. And he said he really appreciated the challenge of writing a story that way. Though he said even though he gave him the critics 6 times the opportunity to whack him as opposed to just once. But yeah, it's this is a 1999 film, and It's funny how when we're doing our Babylon 5 podcast, we're always talking about that series came out in the 90s as well. It's amazing how sophisticated audiences have become since that time, and our standards for watching things have changed dramatically. Fortunately, I think this movie and The Shawshank Redemption are so well written that they withstand the test of time, and they are timeless because they're in a way fairy tales, I guess you could say. But the setting is timeless as well. Interestingly enough, both movies take place in a prison, but the vibe and the atmosphere of those two movies is quite a bit different. And The Green Mile is definitely a much more emotional movie because it deals with capital punishment, and I think it's pretty clear on which side of the ledger it stands as to whether that is something that we should be doing or not. But I just want to, geez, where to start? There's just the story is pretty straightforward. It's pretty linear. There's not too much flashbacking, except really at crucial moments throughout the film. So it's a pretty straightforward story. Starts out in present day, and the main character is Paul Edgecombe, who is an older gentleman. He's living in a group home, and from there, events are set up that he recounts his past history, and then we drop back to 1935. He is the chief guard of the cell block E, where they carry out executions of prisoners. So these are the worst of the worst. But the environment of the prison block is quite a bit different than what I think a lot of people would think of for a death row scenario. And of course, this is where the title of the movie comes from, because the cord in the cell block is green linoleum, and so they call it the Green Mile. I think the first thing that we'll talk about is the setting up is the casting, and I'll just let you guys run through which actors you really shone out for you. Some of them are quite obvious. I do think there's one unsung, maybe not unsung, because people always do mention him, actor in this movie that I think it's often said a movie is only as good as its villains, and I think this one has one of the best villains in screen history. Jesse, let's start with you. What do you think of the casting of this movie?
Karen and I had talked before we hit record of what an amazing cast this is. And I think, first off, every time I watch a Tom Hanks movie, I go, gosh, this guy is just amazing. And he looks so young in this, right? Because I hadn't thought about, this is almost 25 years old. So absolutely, it doesn't feel that old, as you talked about. Yeah, the villains are all great. But I think a couple of people that I especially love Bonnie Hunt in this movie. I've always got, whenever she's something, I always love watching her. James Conwell is good in that it's a smaller, vital role. You're going to talk about Sam Rockwell, and I always think of him in Galaxy Quest. But if I had to pick just one person to talk, I think David Morse is so good in that, playing, you could feel, is Paul's best friend, his second in command, and has so many just nice moments, coming up with Mouseville, doing others. But you could go on and on, right? Like Barry Pepper, Jeffrey Damone, just Dabbs Greer in his last role. I just think on and on that year is just one stellar performance after another.
All right. Sure.
Yeah, I agree. David Morse was fantastic in this. Harry Dean Stanton, who was hit or miss for me as Toot Toot, was very interesting. One of my favorite character actors when he was alive, Michael Jeter. He was in several movies with Robin Williams, and to hold up your own next to Robin Williams is saying something. I think he was so talented, and it was a shame we lost him so soon after this movie. But I thought he was fantastic in this. I don't think there's any weak point
Yeah.
in this movie. And there's a lot of interconnectivity
Mm-hmm.
between these actors. Several of them are Darabont's stable, in his stable of actors.
Yep.
Who was it?
Jeffrey DeMunn.
Jeffrey, yeah, he was in The Walking Dead, but a couple other actors and actresses that were in other movies of his. And then several actors that were in other shows and movies together down the line. It's amusing to me now looking back on it. You guys know already, one of my favorite shows ever is Parks and Rec. And there were 3 or 4 actors in this movie that went on to be on Parks and Rec as fairly regular characters, which I could see that if they were background characters or whatever. Some of them had recurring roles in Parks and Rec. And so I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And then several of the actors also went on to be in 6 Feet Under, notably Patricia Clarkson and James Cromwell were both pretty big characters in 6 Feet Under. Patricia Cornwell being the being the sister of the main female, the mother of the group. And James Cromwell married her in the later seasons. Not Patricia, married the sister, the main female, the mother. So they had pretty big roles as well. They had roles together. But again, none of them were bad. There's no downbeats. And Doug Hutchinson as Percy, oh my God.
Yep.
He is,
He is
How
fantastic.
crazy was that? And I heard also that Sam Rockwell was pretty into this character. He had to get into it to be that villainous idiot that he actually instructed the makeup people to make him look bad too.
His teeth.
So in that, and Sam Rockwell, he went on to do other big movies and got much acclaim, like Moon and
billboards from having.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And even stuff like Galaxy Quest, which he's just such a great actor and downplayed in this movie, I think, a little bit, even though he's in a weird way the big bad of this movie, even though Percy is the one we want to hate the most. So that says a lot. And Tom Hanks just knocks it out of the park. Even though we don't see a lot of Dabs Greer in this movie, we see him at the beginning and the end. His impact is unparalleled. And he's one of those actors that wherever he shows up, it's going to be some great acting because he was in a lot of things. Little House on the Prairie, Picket Fences, just so many things he was in that you just know he's going to do a good job. And yeah, this was his last movie role. He did one TV appearance after this, but to see him bringing it in one of his last roles it's good. And again, he wrecks me in this.
Yeah. I also read that Bruce Willis had suggested Michael Don Clark write to that he would be a good person, and he nominated for an Academy Award in a really touching. And one of the things that I really loved this story is Karen was talking about how it wrecks me, and I was sharing that as I was watching this and I'm getting engaged, and toward the end, I'm just hiccup crying because of the tragedy of this and Tom Hanks' guilt. That he's had to do what he had to do, even though John forgives him and says you're doing a kindness. To his mind, he's not. I'm giving this gift. And it just, visually, this is a beautiful movie.
Yep.
Agreed.
For sure.
Yeah, and I forget to mention also Graham Greene, who
very small role, but
has been in
really,
things as well. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the things I like to do is become habit is watch people's reactions of movies and the trailers and things like that. And I always get a kick out of watching the Green Mile reactions. There's two things that usually come out. One of them I'll leave till later, but the one that always comes up is everybody hates Percy Wetmore. Doug
How could you not?
Does a great job. And even his name, like Wetmore, is like
Right.
what a great name for a villain.
Hey, can I ask something real quick?
Sure.
I haven't reread the books yet, but I did read them back in the day. Do they mention his squeaky shoes in the book? Because I feel like I've read
Uh,
something about.
I think they do, but I'm not sure. But
Okay,
yeah,
that's some flaw in his character that you can tell someone from.
they talk about his hair quite a bit.
Okay,
Yeah, the
Yeah.
oily hair.
just there's lots of clues to show that he's just a
Yeah, yeah,
off kilter.
yeah. And of course, Michael Clark Duncan is John
Mm,
Coffey. My God. It's funny because nowadays, where everything's so labely, being woke and whatnot, one of the things that people detract King stories and the movie is the trope of the magical Negro. And
mm,
Mhm.
at the time when I read this book, I had never heard of that trope, and I don't know if King invented it, but I don't really remember too many other stories using it, black characters with magical powers besides Stephen King. So I don't know if that's something that you guys have run across in other stories,
yep.
but I know he did it in The Stand as well with Mother Abigail, but it's not something, I mean, there's only so many different ways you can go with these kind of stories, right? Either it's like things are happening in your dreams, or there's a child that has a magical power, or some poor, you know, underclass and especially in this time period, black people were an underclass. And I think it's a weird criticism, but I know things are much more hypersensitive in these times, but it's not something that's ever bothered me. And maybe that's saying something about me in the era that I grew up in, that I'm not offended by the fact that King does things like this. But I just look at this. We're talking about a fantastical conventions type of story. Like, how many different ways can you introduce elements that, plausibly into the story that makes sense? I always find that a weird criticism, but I don't know how you two feel about that. Jesse, do you have any thoughts on that, or is that not something you don't really?
No, I have seen, and I am not going to belittle anyone's feelings or their thoughts. I don't see it as often, right?
Hmm.
There are certain tropes I see, and there are other tropes I don't see. I, with all love and respect, I used to joke that Wayne Knight in Jurassic Park makes all fat guys with glasses look bad, and I'm offended as a fat guy with glasses.
Yeah.
And but I'm doing that tongue in cheek. It is Pixie Girl, the girlfriend in an icebox. These are all things that if you aren't looking for, you necessarily don't see.
Hmm.
And then when you do see them, I understand the people that are bothered by that. And there are, so I think it's a legitimate concern. I didn't see it. What I saw is that to tell a story that this would not has been as strong if you had a giant white guy being the person that was convicted of murder.
Hmm.
I just recently rewatched To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, really, obviously brilliant film.
Hmm.
And seeing that the person being accused had no chance of being defended.
Right.
They were already convicted because he was black and that it was a white woman that had been attacked. And it was just a matter of going through the motions that he was going to be guilty, no matter
Right.
how much Gregory Peck works on that.
Hmm.
So I think that storytelling is important and that it was this giant, gentle person.
Hmm.
And it helps similar where I remember the Princess Bride, where the director, and drawing a blank all of a sudden, said it helps if you're going to Robin, shit, come on guys, help me. Rob
Robin Wright?
Reiner. Yeah, Rob
Oh,
Reiner.
Rob Reiner.
Yeah, Rob Reiner says it helps if you're going to cast a giant that you actually have a giant in your film,
Yep.
right? So it helps you cast someone who has that gentleness. And I go back to right at the end when he says, "Please don't put that mask on me. I'm afraid of the
Yep.
dark."
Yeah.
It
Yep.
just
It's got you. Yeah.
it cuts you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So did that answer the question?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Karen, do you have any thoughts on
Yeah,
that stereo?
it happened before this movie. I just looked it up. This isn't me
Okay.
recalling anything. At the end of Sergeant Pepper, where Billy Porter is like magical, quote unquote, seems to be like the first time it was acknowledged. Spike Lee always denounced it. But yeah, I've seen it a couple times. I don't even really think about it. I think it's the person. There's always the magical healer that's American Indian. There's shaman. There's the gypsy, quote unquote, that's doing the magic. They're always some kind of other ethnicity, like saying that they're different, that they get things more than we do. And I don't know that it bothers me so much as a trope. It is a trope, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Like just the next year, the legend of, yeah.
And of course, Asians always have this wisdom, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it happens across all ethnicities because we are white centric, the people that make movies. And I'm talking about back then.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to sound terrible, but that's why that trope exists, because they want someone other to be the magical person.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it doesn't bother me so much. That they're special because there's so much hate in the world to make them special.
Yeah.
And especially Michael Clark Duncan in this movie. Wow. The way he portrays it is beautiful in its simplicity. And I, like Jesse said, it's nice that they cast a quote unquote giant in this role. One of the things I did find yesterday when I went and looked some stuff up, like Wikipedia and things like that, is that he actually stopped working out before this movie so he would look more naturally big. And they scaled down everything to make him look bigger than everyone else.
Yeah.
There was a lot of trickery because he was about the same height as David Morse. Like they showed David Morse leaning in the doorway to the cell and that he's got a couple inches leeway, and Michael Clark Duncan has to duck.
Yeah.
There's just little things. His bed was shortened, just so many things they did. And I think they did it in a way that's fairly transparent, that we don't.
Yeah. It works for most of the time, but it's just, the only thing that doesn't work for me is the length of his limbs don't match his height. Like when he goes to shake Tom Hanks' hand in the cell, it's like his arm isn't that long. You could argue that that's just his body type, but yeah, I thought they handled that aspect of it pretty well. Yeah, the only reason I bring up the trope stuff is because I think that culturally, white people are pretty vanilla in terms of mysticism. There's not, and you could even argue that I always think of gypsies as white people, though they're Armenian, which isn't really white. But it's just, we're more plugged into technology and much more man-made things, whereas a lot of other cultures have all this deep, rich history of tales of supernatural and whatnot. And I think it's just a easier place to go to than to try to do that with a white person. But that's neither here nor there. I just always find it a curious. Sometimes people complain about things to me that I just think, yeah, but what's the alternative? That's what you never hear, right? They make these complaints and says, well, how else are you going to make the story work?
Exactly. And I think a lot of this story was about race.
Yes.
Why not?
None of the prisoners were really white. Well, the majority of them weren't. And that king rolled his eyes and people complained that John Coffey's initials were JC, and he's going, come on, guys, this isn't rocket science.
Yeah. And so I had never heard this. And so I just looked at the magical Negro in Wikipedia, and we could spend a whole episode just debating because there are things that I think just are really unfair. They included in the list is Will Smith playing Aladdin. Like that's the whole premise.
No.
Yeah, I'm serious. And they have that what was the other one that I really had a problem with? I was looking at, they said that obviously I think Scatman Crothers in The Shining would be valid.
Sure.
I could see that, right? But Vinny which is played by Lawrence Fishburne in Searching for Bobby Fischer, which is one of my favorite films.
Right.
Mhm.
He's not mythical.
He's just good.
He's a street guy.
Yeah.
So anyway,
yeah.
interesting point.
Come on. Robin Williams played the genie before
Yeah.
Will Smith. So come on.
Right.
Get over that one.
Yeah.
It's just more the personality sometimes.
Yeah.
But the other point about the cast that I make is I understand that Tom Hanks is a well-loved, beloved actor, and with very good reason. But for me, when I was hearing about this movie being made, I always thought he's too high profile. People are just going to see Tom Hanks in this role. I actually would have loved David Morris to play the role that Tom Hanks got. I think that would have been the better fit for the movie, but I've certainly cannot take away anything from Tom Hanks' performance in this movie. He's really good. I just had a softer spot for David Morris because I always liked him on Saint Elsewhere and other things.
I love David Morse.
Yeah. And then, of course, the one cast member that we haven't mentioned yet is Mr. Jingles.
Oh, yeah.
The little
Mr.
mouse.
Jingles.
I was always amazed at how they got that mouse to do all those tricks. At the time, I said, is this CGI? Or like, how are they doing this stuff with him running across his shoulders and moving that spool? But
I assumed it was CGI.
No, with the spool, they had it actually like it was on a little device that they would pull it and it would roll the spool, and the mouse would just sort of go with it. But it's
the mouses were trained, so it wasn't CGI, but they didn't do everything that was in the movie.
No. Yeah. That little character became quite an important plot point, the engine that drives the story in a way, I guess you could say. Yeah, Michael Jader, though, because he gets such a bad send-off, his arc, I think, is probably the most heartbreaking in the story. And I particularly think of the moment when he's being let out to walk his last mile. He says, "I sure wish I could have known you guys before I came here." That really breaks my heart, that moment as well, because in this prison world, with one or two exceptions, most of the people there seem to be there as victims of circumstance rather than personal choice. So that's a tragic part of it as well.
Inequality is still
bad, like an Indian,
racially.
a black man, a Frenchman. Wild Bill Wharton, by and large, it seems to be the place where non-whites end up, especially in this period of time. I think the other thing let's turn out more to the story. I think the thing that I always get a kick out, and this will address the second point I always get from watching YouTube reactions to this movie. I think one of the strengths of this movie is, yes, it's long, but it really sets up the world well, that you're really invested in the story before you get to this certain scene in the movie that I think that throws a lot of people off when they see it. And you get to know pretty well all the characters, about the two dead girls, about the warden's wife's got this brain tumor, that the Graham Greene's character, Arlene Bitterbuck, is up next for execution, and that Percy's a dick and everybody on the cell block hates him. And that he's looking maybe to transfer to another job, and that Percy's got connections that will protect him if things ever go bad for him. So a lot of stuff is being set up. And then you get to this point in the movie, and Paul's got this urinary infection. So then you get to this point in the movie where John Coffey grabs Paul Edgecombe and touches his crotch and then spits out all this, it looks like bugs. And people watching the movie are going like, what the hell is going on? Like, what is this? So I thought this was a serious movie. I think it's important that the movie is structured the way it is, and the story too, for that matter. Though if you're reading a Stephen King story, you're expecting fantastical elements to come into it. But for the average moviegoer, they've got no clue about what they're watching. For this moment in the movie to happen, and for the viewers to still be invested in the story, I think is a testament to how well the first hour of the movie sets up the story. And I don't know if you can cast back to when you first saw the movie for the first time. Maybe you read the book. I don't know if you read the book before you saw the movie, but Jesse, what was your reaction to that scene where John Coffey heals Paul Edgecombe?
So I had read the book before, so I knew what was coming.
Right.
Was curious to see how they were going to show this. I remember reading the book, and it's hard for me to separate the
Sure.
two, but there are certain books that are so well written that I find myself caught up into that character. And the pain of a urinary tract infection is something that is real. So I felt that pain. Similar to, there was a Fletch book by Gregory MacDonald where Fletch has insomnia. And I was reading the book. I felt that of not being able to sleep. And I love the scene where he's in so much pain he can't relieve himself, and then the joy of after that healed, right, that simple pleasure of, oh my God, I can't believe this doesn't hurt.
Mhm.
And it's a great example of, as we often talk about, show not tell,
Mhm.
right? They are showing that he's been able to heal, and that Coffee senses pain. He senses pain all the time. And
Yeah.
all he ever wants to do is to heal that pain.
Yeah.
And that sets up the payoff that when you realize that an innocent man is dying, I go back to it's a kindness you're doing for me.
Mhm.
It is a kindness because I just can't, I can't continue to live with this much pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Karen.
Yeah, I had read the books. I put them out of my mind to watch the movie, although I did obviously know what was coming. And you can say that about any Stephen King movie, that there's going to be stuff in it that's otherworldly. If it's horror, if it's magical, there's going to be something in it that's crazy and offbeat and not real.
There are two exceptions that I can think of. Obviously, Shawshank and Dolores Claiborne.
And the last book that we talked about with Holly,
Oh yeah.
there's really no magic in that
Let
one
It
either.
Bleed.
But
Yep.
yeah, there's darkness, obviously. But
Stand by Me, the body.
Yep.
Yeah, so
sure,
yeah, and I think
but those are the exception that
yeah,
prove the rule, essentially.
yeah, and one of the things, and then is what has made Stephen King to me stand out as one of the great writers of modern times is the humanity he puts in the supernatural.
Yep.
So you're right. He always has most has a supernatural blend, but he always has humanity, no matter how wild and supernatural and extreme he is in his horror or
Yep.
fantasy or fiction.
And I think he does it in a way that makes it believable to me.
Yep.
I completely agree that this man could have existed in the 30s. And there's a lot of irony in this movie, a lot of irony.
Mm-hmm.
One of them being that he heals people, but he also feels the pain of the world. That's part of his thing, that everyone has hatred in it. And it's not true that everyone, but he feels like all the hatred. And it's funny that he says, and I forget this completely, that he says it's like glass. It makes me feel like maybe some of his power is synesthesia, which I have. When I have headaches, it feels like glass coming at me. It's the exchange of senses.
Mm-hmm.
So like when I smell something, I get a feeling. There's lots of things that like my senses get mixed up sometimes. And I feel like he also had that. That can be a sympathetic ability. So that kind of resonated with me as well, that he feels things differently. Like I see a calendar and it's here. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's just a weird thing that my senses are weird. That resonates with me, like I said. And I feel like when he drops that in, he escalates it in the movie in a way that he set that baseline already with number one, the girls, which you have to go back, and because we don't see his power then.
Hmm.
But looking back on it, we see that's what he was trying to do. And he says the same thing, that he couldn't fix it and that he's trying to fix it. And that slowly dawns on you that he didn't kill them. He was trying to bring them back to life, but it was too late. And each time he does it in the movie, it's a bigger and bigger thing. And I love that he uses it as a weapon, knowing that his life is ending in a few days.
Mm.
He knows he's up next for the chair, for what do they call it? Old Sparky.
Yep.
But he decides that man killed those two girls, and Percy is evil as well. So he's going to use his gift to punish those two people before he goes, even though it's against his whole thing of curing people. So it's just the magicality in this movie is underplayed as far as I'm concerned, that it's an incidental device used to show how much hatred and evil there is in the world, and how there are people that are good also in the world.
Yeah.
Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And I like where you went with that, because that was leading off to my next discussion point, is how well interwoven the story is. As I mentioned, we have the two dead girls that we're playing off, and the additions that Darabont made to this movie and to Shawshank is on the audio-visual side. He added the Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, "I'm in Heaven" clip. That's not in the book. And same with Shawshank, he added the opera scene into the movie that's not in the book. But beyond Darabont's contributions, we have devices like Mr. Jingles plays several functions in the storyline. First of all, he becomes the avatar for everybody else to see John Coffey's power, right? Because we get first John Coffey healing Paul, then he heals Mr. Jingles. And it's at this point, if people haven't clued into it now, we realize what he was trying to do for the two dead girls. And the first thing he said, I tried to take it back, but it was too late. When you hear it the first time, you have a feeling that it's meaning one thing, but when you see the other events unfolding, you realize that he was trying to do something totally opposite to what we initially thought. So that kind of stuff is just great. And then later on, Mr. Jingles plays another part in the story about the longevity of the mouse, and more importantly to us, Paul Edgecombe, like how long is he going to live? So I love that type of storytelling where you can use one thing for several purposes, because I just think it makes everything more emotionally resonant for the reader or the viewer. And then we also have they say in storytelling, you have to repeat things in order for people to remember or appreciate the importance of them in the story. And I think we have with the Old Sparky, we have 3 executions. We have Bitterbuck, and then we have the terrible one with Edward Delacroix, and then finally we have John Coffey's execution. And with each one, the first one is bad enough, and that's a good execution. Then we have the terrible one where there's no water put on the sponge, and then we have the one for John Coffey. And the context of each execution has a different subtext to it. For Bitterbuck, it's not as clear or as strong as the other two, but I just want to ask you guys about your thoughts on the 3 executions. And in general, does it sway you one way or the other about executions in general, or is that something you already had an opinion about before you saw this movie? Is it reinforced it or changed your mind in any way? So Karen, I'll kick that one off to you first. And I just think that is one of I don't know how they came up with this whole concept of electric chairs to begin with, but it's a pretty inhumane way, I think, of executing somebody. I think hanging actually would be cleaner, less painful.
Guillotine is cleaner, to be honest.
Yeah.
It didn't change my mind about execution, but I do have to say that my mind is of the mindset that I honestly don't know whether it should be done or not. And this movie didn't sway me one way or the other. I still am torn about whether it should be done or not. I feel like there are people that don't deserve to breathe the same air as me. But our justice system is so flawed that I don't want people to be executed that didn't do what they're accused of. And the chances of that happening are greater than people think. It's something that I guess I feel strongly about in my waveringness. Does that make sense? I go back and forth. John Oliver on Last Week Tonight has done a couple of episodes dealing with jail, people being incarcerated, and one about executions in particular. And he's definitely against it. But watching that kind of thing, and also with my own opinions, I still am so torn over it. And yeah, it's horrific in this. There are other ways to execute people: firing squad, guillotine, hanging, and now we have the injections. And it's hard for me to say because there's no feedback. Those people are dead afterwards, so they can't tell us how inhumane it is. And I think that's part of the issue is we don't get that feedback so we can separate ourselves from it. And it's definitely a divisive issue. I don't blame anyone who is for or against it at all. I think everyone's opinion is valid, but I am of the mind that I don't know whether we should do it or not. And this movie made it horrific, definitely. Even Graham Greene's execution, Bitterbuck, is not great.
No,
they're all bad.
Yeah.
It does escalate, essentially. It escalates, and then the John Coffey being executed is just terrible. And the way it escalates is that he's innocent. And that's what makes it so horrific.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Michael Jeter, probably not innocent. We don't know whether he's innocent or not, to be fair.
I think he's guilty.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's guilty. And also Graham Greene, he killed someone due to, was it insurance fraud or whatever? I don't remember from the book, but we're not told in the movie what they did. We're just assuming they both did what they're accused of. So Graham Greene, normal execution. Then we get Michael Jeter, who's just terrible. It doesn't fit his crime, no matter what his crime was. And then John Coffey, it escalates because he is accused of something terrible. The audience is throwing hate at him, which makes it even worse because...
Kill him twice, boys.
Right, exactly. Yeah. When it was the dude's fault that his kids were killed because he hired the guy that killed the kids. We see all of that. And then we see Edgecombe reach out and hold his hand as he's dying. And it makes it all the sadder. So I do think it escalates, which makes it horrific, period, in this movie. And it is definitely, I feel like the big bad is execution in this movie. To be fair, there's many big bads. Wild Bill, Percy, however they say it, Percy. I can't do that accent that Tom Hanks does, and John Coffey, not John Coffey, the execution chair of John Coffey. They're all bad. The evil in this, the parents, Wild Bill, the other two inmates, they're bad, and I put air quotes around that too. There's a lot of bad things in this movie, but the thing that strikes me is through that, all of that evil, and he uses it in this movie as a device, is the shining light. So there's times of shining light through all this darkness, and it's really a powerful tool to show all these things as evil, even if it's not coming out and saying this is evil. And then for John Coffey to just be this ray of light, and the fact that he transfers that ray of light to other, and you see the light when he's holding Mr. Jingles in his hand, right? You see that.
Yep.
And so I'm assuming that's what transferred part of him into the mouse. And I feel like Paul is the rightful owner of that piece of John Coffey, and he it makes him more guilty, I think, because he was given this gift and it's not a gift. He sees what John Coffey had to deal with, seeing all the evil in the world and that people die around him. And
Just the feeling of it.
Right. And there's
all the
so much
time.
sadness,
Yep.
but then this ray of light through the sadness. And I think Mr. Jingles also portrays that ray of light, that he's like the joy in Paul's life, that he goes and feeds him and throws him the thimble and not the thimble, the spool. But yeah, it's just really cool how Stephen King and Darabont make that clear to us without coming out and saying it. And this whole thing is tell, not show. No,
Yep.
Show, not tell.
Yep. Yep.
The right way.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm rambling.
That's
I
okay.
apologize.
No, you're good.
That's good. Jesse.
Yeah, I am against the death penalty. I understand the argument for it, and that's not the debate of this podcast. I think the underlying thing that made me is that, as Karen talked about, there is the possibility of wrongful convictions, and so that's enough for me. I also think that one of the things that they show both in the book and the movie is that giving kindness even to someone that maybe shouldn't deserve it. In the book, it's a little more clear that the reason why Paul and the team gives them whatever they want is just so things will get along.
Yeah.
It keeps
Right.
easy. In the movie, it looks like he's a little kinder than he actually is. But the idea of when the chief talks about, and Graham Greene talks about, do you think heaven is when you go back to a time in your good life?
Yeah.
And he goes, I absolutely think that's what it is. He's going to say whatever he says just to keep things going as well as they can.
Yeah, and that's shown in Mouseville as well,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And the prisoners, and that's what Mouseville also shows, that the prisoners will grab onto anything that they can. Because
Yeah.
deep down, Delacroix knows that Mouseville's not real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he wants to believe it's real because it just
Yeah.
makes his last days on Earth more
Yeah.
bearable, or have some sort of hope or purpose. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it, once again, it shows the spiteness and the meanness of Percy, that
Mhm.
to say that right before someone is going to die,
Yeah.
just out of anger, just out of spite. And it is a very powerful image of why the death penalty is a very disturbing. The other reason, and I had a wonderful friend who was an attorney, and he says that's it. It becomes revenge, not justice. And they show that very well with the family watching. Kill him twice.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're going to burn in hell. I will give a recommendation for a different side of the story. Back in August, I had a guest on Set Listing Bruce named Sarah Gregory, and I recommend, if you want to hear a different side of the death penalty, listen to that episode. She tells the story that her grandmother was killed by a family friend, and that led her to a lot of self-abuse and self-medication. She got a journey, became sober, but would not forgive the person who killed her grandmother. And then something happens, it's Bruce related, that led her to that journey of forgiveness. And she actually was at the execution of the man with kindness and love in her eyes as she watched him being executed. So it's absolutely one of my favorite episodes of Set Listing Bruce, and I recommend it hard, with Sarah Gregory, A Journey of Forgiveness, back in August.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a complicated a complicated question, because there are people that are, we didn't talk about Gary Sinise's very small role, but where he talks about that everyone defends that dog out of nowhere attacked his son, and how you can't trust that one, and you put that animal down, and that's what he believes John Coffey was. He was an animal, and if we had not known he was innocent, that we might have that same feeling to
Yep.
kill those two young girls. Really complicated,
Yep.
very in depth, and I'm going to throw on my little snobbery hat for people who go, Stephen King, pop culture. Anyone could do that. No, you can't. He is a gifted writer that has chosen this field of writing, but he is, as always, as great writers, you're dealing with universal truths and humanity and exploring it in different ways.
Yeah. For me, this is one of those Stephen King stories. I just go like, how did he think up this whole thing?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's such a unique concept, but
I think that a lot with Stephen King, though.
Yeah.
It's all fantastical. And now that you mention Gary Sinise, I think it's cool that I didn't remember he was in this. And then it flashes he's been in 3 movies with Tom Hanks. He was in Forrest Gump, of course, Lieutenant Dan.
Yeah.
And Apollo 13.
Yeah.
He was the Ken. There's all this interconnectivity, which I love that.
Yeah. And he, of course, was in the original
something else.
Stand.
The Stand, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that we could talk about probably 2 items. I think the healing sequence with the warden's wife was pretty touching. But I don't know if there's a lot to say there. It just reinforced John's abilities. And then, of course, it led up to the setup of Percy and Wild Bill both being taken out. And then the delicious irony of Percy actually going to the Institute, but not as a staff member, but as an inmate.
So great. Again, irony.
Yeah. So I thought those 2 scenes were pretty powerful on their own, and just again nicely tied what appeared to be different story threads together. And Jesse, if you got anything to say on those two parts of the movie, please do.
Yeah, I had forgotten. I remember Coffey not spitting out the badness, right? Like I remember that part of it. But I had forgotten that he used Percy as the weapon, right?
Yeah.
So that was shocking. Oh yeah, wow, okay. 2 bad people with 1 stone.
Yeah.
And
with 1 swarm.
Yeah. The Patricia Clarkson is wonderful as Melinda, and that giving him the St. Christopher Medal, thanking him. And another really lovely point is the warden, Hal, James Cromwell, says, I will protect you any way I can, but did any of this have to do with what happened at my house? And Tom Hanks just lies to him. No. This has nothing to do.
Yeah. And I don't think it was a very convincing lie, though.
No, but, and you don't look, as we do cliches, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And then I love that both he and Brutus, right, they realize they need to change jobs. And I'm thinking that the warden had enough influence to get them that other job, right? It's the Depression. There aren't that many jobs available. But I'm sure he used his influence to get them on that to do a better life. And as he said, try to save them when they're young.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once again, I think on a funny note is Paul going home and feeling an itch and having it scratched 4 times with Jan was just really
so great.
Sweet and funny. And then for cornbread, she was grateful. Yeah, she was grateful, right?
Here's some cornbread. She was grateful for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Karen.
What's
your thoughts on
point?
The healing scene and
with Melinda,
the setup with Percy and
Patricia Clarkson is always great. She was in Parks and Rec. I just have to mention that she played Ron's first ex-wife, Tammy 1, as it were. I like her in anything, and she was great. As small a part as she had, we saw her in a couple different ways, dying, but on a good day, dying on a horrible day. And for that to turn into her coming back to life. That scene where they pan away and come back to her, and she is just like perking up. The life is going back into her. And to see John Coffey coughing, but holding it in. And for me, the first time I saw it, I thought for sure that he was doing it because he knew he was going to die. But to see what happened afterwards, I was like, yes. It's very cutthroat of me, but I was glad because those two people, like I said, don't deserve to breathe the same air as good people. But yeah, I love that scene. I love the transferring of the necklace. And isn't he the patron saint of good travels?
Something like that, yep.
Yeah, it's her kind of giving him the safe travels in the afterlife kind of thing.
Yeah.
From what I remember. Again, I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but Saint Christopher, I think. But I love that Paul takes it away from him because he's not allowed to have it in the chair, but he makes sure that he gets it back afterwards. They lie to the prisoners a lot. I'll make sure this happens. They lie to them to comfort them. And he does say, I'll give this back to you after. And it's good that he doesn't lie to him in that case. He does give it back to him afterwards. He could very, very well could have taken that pendant and given it back to Melinda, but he doesn't. He makes sure that John gets to keep it.
Which I thought was very touching, right?
Yeah,
the idea,
very.
like, I'm going to have to take this. And then he does give it back to him. And then the scene earlier, right, where the David Morse said he's paid his debt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will respect him because he's even with the house.
Yeah.
Was really well done too. In a lot of ways, this is a romanticized version of what you wish that people who are working on death row would behave like.
Correct. Yeah, because they're all, except for Percy, great. And I don't remember his name, but the other guard, the younger guard, his crying during that last execution scene gets me. It's part of the
Pepper. Yep.
Okay, Barry. The way he is crying in that scene and Tom Hanks says, or I don't know which one it was, Edgecombe or Brutal, saying he's got to wipe his face before
it was Edgecombe.
Edgecombe, okay. And he does, but he continues to cry. And even the executioner cries. And he's not part of that group that was with John Coffey. So I think that seeing the humans, the non-prison people being so hateful, and then all the prison guards who are guarding these horrible people, they have all the sympathy throughout the movie, but especially in that moment. And it shows that dichotomy between people that aren't in the know. It's easy to be hateful.
Yep.
But once you get to know someone, you realize that things aren't what they seem.
Yep.
So
yeah. The only missing piece from the book in those sequences was with Melinda. I don't know how they would have worked it in the movie, but in the book, because of this brain tumor, she swears like a trooper. I would have just loved to heard her.
Yeah, that would have been great.
Rhyme off some real Blue Streaks lines.
They did a little bit of that, right?
Yeah, not the swearing, just the she was altered.
Yeah. The one big scene that I want to talk about is John and Paul talking to him before his execution. What do you want me to do? Let you go? And then John Coffey says, why would you do such a foolish thing? And then, of course, Paul Edgecombe's worried about his soul because he says, what am I going to tell God, that it was my job? And this is a theme that we've heard repeated throughout history and even today. Just doing my job. And I think that speech with John Coffey with the pieces of glass, and probably the painful line is like, he killed them with their love. That's what they do. That happens every day in the world. Like that is such a bleak outlook on the world. And unfortunately, there's more than a grain of truth in that statement, which is the most depressing part of it. So that that scene really guts me every time. And I just thought that both actors just killed it. And yeah, I think it's from an acting perspective for me, it's the highlight of the movie. Jesse, I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I'm looking at IMDb and it says, "You tell God the Father it was a kindness you done. I know you're hurting and worrying. I can feel it on you, but you are to quit on it now because I want it over and done. I do. I'm tired, boss.
Yeah.
Tired of being on the road, lonely as a sparrow in the rain." It is such a he, John is comforting Paul
Yep.
instead of the other way around. Instead of Paul comforting the person who is going to be executed, he is forgiving him. And yes, I guess you could, with the JC initials and the other forgiving Father for they not know what they do, certainly you could say it would be heavy-handed, but it works for me. It works that they debate obviously about euthanasia, but there are kindness when someone is in massive pain.
Hmm.
That's what hospice is all about. And in this case, I think it's so well done that Paul is willing to risk his life, his livelihood. If you just give me the word and I will let you go as far as and as often as you can. And him, why would you do such a dumb thing, a foolish thing?
Yeah.
And I think that sets up everyone's crying.
Yeah.
And that wonderful scene where Paul can't say roll on two.
Yeah.
He just
Yeah.
do it. And once again, David Morris, Brutus, you've got to say it.
Yeah.
You've got to say it.
Uh,
People staring at him, ready for this glee in their heart to
Mm.
die. They want revenge. They want revenge because in their mind, this is a monster who killed their little girls. And you can't convince them otherwise. There's nothing you can do to convince them that it isn't. Just makes for this wonderfully powerful scene. And as I said, the tears were just flowing from me,
Mm.
that just the injustice. And I think the question is, did John give him a gift or a curse? And to Paul, it's a curse.
Hmm.
I've been forced to watch all this death because I destroyed one of God's great gifts.
Yep.
And I think that is the movie ends in such, when I'm watching this and I'm going, I couldn't remember, do they show the mouse alive or do they show that the mouse is now passed?
No,
So
the mouse is still breathing.
To try to say that maybe there is an end coming, and then you can see the mouse is still alive, and so that green mile is going to continue
Yep.
for so long.
Hmm.
Yep. And you mentioned that John says that he doesn't want to walk alone anymore and be lonely. And I think that's part of the gift that he's given, that he's not lonely anymore. He's made these friends and these people that love him. And they do say it at his execution when he says, all these people hate me. And they say, think about, we love you. Oh my God, I'm going to cry right here.
I am crying right now.
Yeah. Where he says, just feel the love that we're giving you. And that's the gift that he's given back in return for all the good he's done. And I think that is the mercy of that scene where he knows he's got to die. To him, it's a good thing. They're putting him out of his misery, but he does get these gifts at the end. The cornbread, the watching of the film when he says they're angels, that love that he is given in the room to comfort him at the end, and John holding his hand, and he's given this great gift, and they don't realize what they've given him. They feel guilty, but really they've given him something that is more valuable than anything else he's ever had.
Yep.
And it's just so heart-wrenching, those last few scenes when he's watching the movie and all the guys look at each other and he says they're angels. I also like that Toot Toot's the one running the projector. Harry Dean Stanton's running the projector. And then from there on, it's just solid crying for me from the movie on. And before that, there's a few little things that kind of get me, but man, from the movie on, it's just heart-wrenching. And they did have to set the movie back a few years or forward, I don't remember, back a few years to feature Top Hat in it, which is a great movie to use. Fred Astaire is definitely one of my favorites. Only topped by Cary Grant, I think. Maybe Jimmy Stewart. I don't know. They're all there for me, but
Sure.
Yeah.
It's nice to see Fred Astaire as a touchstone in this movie, where it brings back that memory for him, and he can't watch it in the old folks' home, that he has to go away. And this brings the main movie into focus for us, that he is talking to Elaine, and to see at the end where the mouse is still alive, but then he says, I'm going to see you die. I'm going to see this person die. And then they show Elaine dead, which also wrecks me as well. Everything is all the feels from there on. And it hits like a sledgehammer. And I'm not saying he is hitting with the sledgehammer. I'm saying the feelings in these last few, I don't know, last half hour.
Yeah.
I don't remember where, but man, that is just, it's impactful, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic there, because the movie ends on quite a downer.
Yeah.
To be honest about it. And I don't know how you could spin it in any kind of a positive way and remain true to the core of the story. But I can't help but think that because of that downer ending, I don't think this is a movie that I like. Everybody that watches it loves it, but I don't think it's a movie you'll ever say, "Oh, this is one of my favorite movies." Like The Shawshank Redemption makes you feel good at the end of the story, right? This one makes you feel down, and I think that's really the only detrimental aspect of the story that I can pin to it. The other thing, and Jesse's touched on it, is with Mr. Jingles in the book, he dies. So I've always struggled with, why would Darabont, who's so good at adapting Stephen King's material, why would he make that omission? And I know that in the book we learn how the like a lot of the big characters pass away, and it's often not a pretty thing, and especially the death of Paul's wife is horrific.
Yeah, she's in a car accident.
Bus
Accident.
Yeah, and it's described in gory detail. So I'm thinking that Darabont thought, I'm not going to, I can't show all the stuff, or I don't want to show the stuff, but I'm going to leave the ending really ambiguous and not have Mr. Jingles pass away. Whereas in King's version, Mr. Jingles does pass away, which gives you there's definitely an end in line for Paul at some point. But in the movie, it's left ambiguous. I'm torn on that decision. Yeah. What he did with the mist, that one's an even more controversial choice. So
that's why that's not one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations.
Yeah.
Man, that ending is just brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that there is an uplifting message at the end, but there's also this horrible feeling you're left with, where he says, we each owe a death.
Yeah.
And he feels like he hasn't given his due. That because his life is extended, he isn't following through on that promise that we give when we have life, is that the promise is that someday we will die.
Yeah. And it also sets up a very, I think, potential dilemma for Paul, is because he's living so long, he's going to get to the point where he can't look after himself. And yet they're going to wonder, like, how can this guy still be alive? He's so old. Is he going to be faced with having to commit suicide? I just don't see
if it were me, yes.
I just don't see how, but that's a sin, right? So, and he, in his mind, that would probably be a really big sin, because he's feeling like he's been given this long life because he's already committed one sin, and now he's going to compound it with potentially another. So that's a story point I've always wrestled with as well. I don't know, Jesse, if you thought of that at all.
I have actually thought about that. Often it is when someone has immortality, right? They have to fake their own death and then they come
Yeah.
back as their own child or their grandson or something. So I thought about that. How do you check out of that uh, assisted care facility, then move to another one with faked birth certificate? So you're now only 68
Mm.
or 70 in that. And then I go, that's not the emotional core of the movie.
No.
So move that along, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for
Um,
sure.
yeah,
Hand wave, hand wave.
it does feel that we go back to that scene where the David Morse character says he's paid his debt,
Yeah.
that he's fine. To Paul's life, he's not paid his debt.
Right.
And that's why, and I think he has, but it
Mm.
doesn't matter as the viewer if he does or not. The character doesn't think he has.
Right.
The
Right.
character does not think that he is, because he still has that guilt.
Yep.
And he feels all of this is on his own, right? One of the things that in the TV show Lucifer, they talked about hell was because you're not forgiving yourself, right? You
Right.
are creating
You
your
put
own,
yourself in hell.
you
Yeah.
creating your own punishment.
Yeah.
And I think you could certainly make that's his argument, is because he's done this, he's had to live with all these lives and seeing the people he cares about pass.
Yeah.
That's his penance
Yeah, that is
for what he
for sure.
did.
exactly.
Yeah, and this is a story that will resonate more for people our age. Karen's younger than us, but people that are getting
Come
up,
on.
getting up
I'm
in
not
their
that
ages.
younger.
You face, the longer you live, the more death you face.
Yeah.
Family and friends around you. And for yourself, you have little aches and pains that just become part of your daily
Yeah.
life that you put up with because you have no other recourse. Like when Paul says, as the line that we've quoted quite often already, is that we each owe a death. There are no exceptions. But oh God, sometimes the Green Mile seems so long. And as you get older, I think you can really appreciate that statement because every day is more of a struggle and less of a joy as you age. So that by the time that you come to the end, if you live a long life, that I don't think you don't welcome it or relish it, but you're not as afraid of death as you when you're younger. You just think, yeah, you know what? I've had a good time. I've had my run, and now I'm ready to move on to whatever's next, if there's anything else next. And I just think that's maybe just the parable of this story is that, yeah, we've all got our own mile to walk, and for better or worse, you're on your own in the end when it comes down to it. So that's just something sobering, but it's it's just setting the road for you as you get to that point in your life. And
Can
yeah.
I talk about something a little personal with this?
Sure.
When I watched it the first time, it was before my diagnosis of MS. And I have to say, I have a different outlook on it now. It's a disease that's incurable. So for me, I have an endpoint. There's a clock ticking on my life right now that I feel like it wasn't there before. When he says we each owe a death, there are no exceptions and all that, it hits me in a different way now.
Mhm.
And I feel like I am seeing people die around me. Both my parents have passed and my grandparents passed a long time ago, but I'm starting to see like contemporaries pass and
Mm.
I see that my life is not going to get better than this, which is a terrible, depressing thing. But we're having to prepare for my husband will have to take care of me at some point. And to me, that seems miserable. But I don't want to face that at all. And I feel like I connect with that
Right.
a little bit more than I did when I first watched it. But yet there's a lot of different ways that can hit you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see where a younger person, it would affect them maybe, but they don't get the impact as hard as us. And I'm not that much younger than you guys. Seriously. Okay, I'm a different generation.
Yeah.
But barely, just barely.
Yeah.
Yeah, talked a little bit a few minutes ago about before we hit record. I was talking about being at the Bruce show last week, and he's ended this tour with the song I'll See You in My Dreams with almost every show. And it starts with the road is long and seeming without end. And so I do think there is the idea, I will get personal now. My mother is in a nursing home and is paralyzed on her left side. She can't move her left arm, she can't left leg, she can't walk, she can't leave the bed. She's just there waiting to die. And a lot of what was good in my mom is no longer there. And when I go see her, it is just a sadness that there is this feeling of in a lot of ways, I've already lost my mother. And yeah, there is that. I had not thought about this, Lou, till you brought it up, that there is not an upbeat ending. There is not a happiness.
Yeah.
There is just this sadness of Paul having to continue on. It is an emotional movie, and I certainly don't go away sad, unhappy I watched it. I was very happy I went through that emotional journey again and loved that story.
Right.
But it is not something that leaves you inspired
Mm-hmm.
the same way perhaps Shawshank Redemption does, or
Right.
other things we've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a sadness to it that Paul is continuing on this journey alone. And similar to John Coffey, I have no companion. And at this point, Paul's only companion is a mouse.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's again getting personal for me because I've lived in Alberta for now 11 years, 12 years. I spent the rest of the earlier part of my life in Ontario where I had friends in that. But when you move out, especially as an adult, you move out to a new area, it's very difficult to make new friends. And I had made a couple, but both of them have passed away now. One's been 5 years already. I can't believe. And the last one was just in January. He wasn't feeling well. He collapsed. He went to the hospital. He was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic thyroid cancer, undetected. And 2 weeks later, he was gone. And then that's when had an annual ritual where we would go to this writers' conference together, and we met throughout the year and went on walks together and talked about stuff and whatnot. And now that's gone. And now I feel like Paul Edgecombe. I'm just trucking along on my own, and hanging out with you guys has become even more important to me because of that. Because beyond that, I don't have any other acquaintances. And now that I'm retired, I don't go out as much, right? So I'm much more locked in. So yeah, this movie is a sobering reminder of our mortality, but still it's a story that I love, which is weird, right? But it's just so well written, and the characters are just impactful. It's just a great movie.
Yeah, and the acting is
and the music,
it's well worth seeing.
And the compositions of shots and everything. It's just really well done.
Yeah.
So I'll just go around the table one more time for final thoughts. Karen, do you have anything else that you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to parlay to us
except
yet?
I'm gonna need more Kleenex because I'm already all choked up after talking about it. And of course, this last little bit that we've been sharing with each other is also gutting. But yeah, this was a great movie to talk about. Great movie.
Yes. Just thank you for this unexpected birthday gift to us, Lou.
No, it's me that got the birthday gift.
What was interesting is I planned to start my discussion with, is there a reason why you picked this selection? And so you told us right away why. And I just really happy that I got to explore this and revisit something really beautiful. I saw that in many ways, King thinks this is the best adaptation of any of his works. And I could see why he would. And as I said, I'm going to be rereading the book. And so if I had time, I would have tried to reread it before I recorded. So
I'm glad you didn't, because I don't want to confuse. I know there are things that I remember about the book, the fact that they describe all the deaths and everything.
Alrighty. Again, I want to thank you both for sharing this birthday gift with me. It's fantastic. I could have done the Shawshank Redemption, which is my favorite movie, but I've done that one so many times. I don't really
Yeah.
I think there's much more to be in it, but it is an upbeat movie for sure. But The Green Mile is also just a stellar adaptation.
Just never pick The Mist, please.
No, I won't.
Okay, good.
I don't think
We can
Jesse's
talk
seen
about
it by his lack of
Shawshank.
reaction, but you seen The
Oh,
Mist,
yeah.
Jesse?
I've never seen The Mist.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah.
the ending is
It's
terrible.
tough. It's tough.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would
Did
say
they-
if you want to pick Shawshank down the road, I'm all in.
Okay, we'll see.
That's a great movie.
Yeah.
didn't they do another version of The Mist?
Yeah, there was
Has
a
there been
TV
two?
series as well, and it
Okay.
was terrible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
from the
both of
get-go.
them are bad, right?
No,
No, The
the
Mist
Mist
is good.
movie is really good, but it's just really
The ending
tough to
is
swallow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
no,
right.
it's really well done. Frank Darabont definitely had his finger on the key elements of what made a Stephen King story successful. And I think right now Mike Flanagan's the torchbearer of that.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
just hope that he gets to do his Dark Tower series because I
Agreed.
just can't wait for that.
I'll say I don't ever want to watch The Mist again because I know what
Yeah,
happens.
it's
The
like watching
Thing,
Schindler's List, right? Yeah, or
Or,
Saving Private
See-
Ryan.
Seeking a Friend for the End of the World, which is an underrated movie, but I'm never watching it again.
Yeah.
I could watch The Green Mile again, even
Yep.
though it's
Yeah.
a downer a little bit. But
Okay, so that concludes our discussion for The Green Mile. I hope you all enjoyed this. And Jesse, I think you're up next. I don't know what you've picked, or are you
I
still...
do not know yet.
Yet?
I'll have to
Okay.
think about something. I'll
Okay.
let you guys know.
All righty. So while you're thinking, where can people contact you, and maybe they can help you think about something?
Yeah, that would be great. I am at Jesse Jackson DFW on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. You can hear me talking Doctor Who on Next Stop Everywhere. You can hear me talking Bruce Springsteen on Set Listing Bruce. You can hear me talking John Hyatt on Perfectly Good Podcast. And this summer, I will be talking House of Dragons with my buddies. Yeah, please. But yes, our email is, I always have to look it up, is jklb5podcast@gmail.com. If you have suggestions about what we should cover next, send me an email and
Yep.
help me out. Okay?
or tweet us, or you know,
Yeah.
however you want to get in touch with us.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm at Oliveria on the various social medias, including TikTok, where my cat says a lot of things.
I see the cat behind
And yeah, he's laying behind me right now. He rubbed his face on that corner brush and then he passed out. That might give you a clue as to what my cat's doing on TikTok. And hopefully we'll be starting a TikTok soon, and I'll be heading that up. I don't know what that'll be called yet. Probably JKL Media. But yeah, I'm at Oliveria, and then I have a blog called alliestuff.com, and there's a bunch of links there on the landing page for you.
Very cool. And I can be found on YouTube at Lou's Reviews, and where you'll find our JKL Media episodes along with our Babylon 5 podcast, which is our flagship show for right now. I also do writer interviews and the Stephen King podcast. And I think that I will double purpose this as a JKL Media podcast as well as a Stephen King episode, because I haven't been putting out too many Stephen King episodes lately. So I'll
Great
probably do
idea.
double duty on that. And with that, I want to thank all our listeners and, of course, my co-hosts. Thank you for this birthday gift. And till next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Happy
Bye.
birthday.
Thank you. And scene.
The proceeding has been a JKL Media production.